Hey, good evening, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or two while people join. We did have 133 register. We may not get 133 on the call, but as I said, I'll give it a minute and just people are coming on board now. Great to see some familiar names there and some new names as well. Okay, I think I'm going to make a start because we've actually had a lot of questions come through in preparation for tonight's webinar, and we're hoping we will get through them all. But firstly, I just wanted to welcome everyone. I'm Susie Green. If you don't know me already, I am the CEO and founder of the Positivity Institute, and we've been, I guess, committed to and using the mental toughness concept for about 8 years, I think now, since I first met Doug and Peter in Kansas. And Doug and I were having a bit of a laugh about that last time, that I'm not Dorothy, but I'm the Wizard of Oz, which I quite like that reference, Doug. So it's been wonderful to build this relationship over the last, how many years? Yeah, about 8 years, and learn more and more about mental toughness. We're using it quite a lot right now in terms of the situation that we've all found ourselves in, with resilience in particular being a very popular topic right now. As you'll hear tonight, there are some slight differences in resilience and mental toughness, but we actually find it a really great concept to help look at resilience as well. So I'd like to introduce Doug Strycharczyk. He's the CEO and co-founder of the AQR, the company AQR, together with Peter Clough, Professor Peter Clough. And Doug was on a webinar call with me a few weeks ago, as I mentioned, and we had quite a lot of interest. So we thought we'd invite Peter along tonight. Peter is the academic, the very, strong academic background. He's currently at Huddersfield University, which is in West Yorkshire, and he is a research professor, and he's also the chair of applied psychology. And Peter has published numerous articles on mental toughness, and it's wonderful to have Peter on the call tonight. I'm really looking forward to his responses to some of these questions myself. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Doug.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, Susie, but we'll perhaps start with Peter, because Peter is the person who first understood that the mental toughness concept had 4 constructs. And perhaps Peter can just take us through the concept for a couple of moments.
Thanks, Doug. Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from the east coast of England. In my case, it's a nice sunny morning here. Clearly, yeah, time for a strange and funny accent as well, so I will try and enunciate, but I am a rambling northerner. So when we talk about mental toughness, as was said in the introduction, I'm the academic lead on the team, and what we academics really like, sometimes it gets lost in the translation, is a debate, questions. We have a view of mental toughness. It's not the only view. Yeah, we've defined our models. We've got lots of research. We're proud of what we do. But certainly in the UK, when we're talking about COVID at the moment, scientists are at pains to point out we have answers, but not all the answers, and they're open to interpretation. So what we want today is talk through stuff, answer some questions, and the questions always make me think and lead me on to other research opportunities. So thanks for the questions. So we define mental toughness as a personality trait. Over the years, it's developed. It's a narrow personality trait. It has, therefore, relationships with things like extroversion, neuroticism. They're big, broad categories. And it's about how people respond when exposed to stresses and pressures. And what we're interested in is, although these are difficult times, and clearly it's not going well, certainly in the UK to some extent. There's always difficult times. Individuals, at any one point, there's going to be individuals going through miserable and challenging situations, and it's how to deal with those. So we're not dismissive of the pressures, but basically pressure is, yeah, the name of the game, and change is the name of the game. So what we're interested in, you know, the starting point, when I pass over to Doug, my interest is, how do some people prosper under pressure? And more important, some people actually enjoy pressure. You know, we have two ways of stress. We have brownout and burnout. Brownout is rusting away. Burnout is because of high pressures, as it suggests, not being able to function. But for lots of people, and I think lots of people listening in, brownout is the most scary. You know, predictability, doing the same thing day after day is a more scary proposition than doing something different. So the model itself has a lot of academic credibility. There's lots of discussions and disagreements between academics, but that's how academics should be. That's the nature of my job. If nobody disagreed with us, I'm not doing my job right. But even you might find as we go through, Doug and I disagree in a gentle way, and that's absolutely fine. We have different perspectives as you do, but there's no simple answer. But there's lots of, what we're interested in mental toughness is a nuanced approach. And on that basis, I'll pass over to Doug.
Thank you, Peter. Right. Okay, so Peter has described mental toughness as a personality trait. Most of the people listening, and welcome to everyone, will have a good understanding of personality, but most of your experience, I guess, will be around behavioral aspects of personality. So we talk about personality, and we use personality measures to assess and understand how we act when things happen. Mental toughness looks at a different, perhaps more fundamental aspect of personality. That's how we think, how we respond mentally when events occur. And what we know is from a massive research, there are now about 100 peer-reviewed independent research papers. So they're completely independent of AQR, which demonstrates there's a relationship between mental toughness, how I think, and things like performance, behavior, agility, well-being being the big one, and aspirations. And that research has been carried out in a whole range of spheres, everything from business through to education, through social applications, sport, and so on. So we know that it's a concept that seems to apply to everyone, everywhere. And it's identifying a fundamental aspect of personality. Now, when Peter did his original work, he was able to identify that mental toughness was consisted of 4 constructs: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Now, this is a tribute to Peter, because a lot of researchers, once they get to a point being able to publish something and announce something, tend to stop and tend to repeat what they do. But Peter and I have worked and collaborated and sometimes disagreed, but we've managed to get to some sort of a consensus that the 4 C's, control, commitment, challenge, and confidence, actually consist of 8 factors. And there may be more, but this is what we've discovered so far. And there are, as you can see from the image, 2 factors applying to each one of the C's. So we know that control, which describes the extent to which you mentally feel that you control sufficient of your life to be able to achieve what you do, consists of 2 elements. One is life control. This is really the simplest way of describing that is, this is where the sense of can-do sits. You know, the old Henry Ford saying, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you're probably right. But the other factor is emotional control, and that's describing not so much emotional control, because you can't really control your emotions, but emotional management. To what extent mentally can you manage your emotional responses to events and show the world the emotions you want to show, or the lack of emotions you want to show? The second element is commitment, and it's not too difficult to understand that rests on 2 factors. One is goal orientation, and we sometimes talk about the extent to which I make promises. Sometimes those promises are to myself. These are the goals I want to achieve. And delivery orientation. And we know that there's an interplay between the two, because we quite often find people who will have goals, but won't do what it takes to achieve those goals. And curiously, you have people who either avoid goals and sometimes don't think in terms of goals, but if you ask them to do something, their delivery orientation is quite high and they get satisfaction from achieving things. So those 4 factors explain control and commitment. And one of the questions that's been posed is about the difference between resilience and mental toughness. And we will talk about that a little bit more, but those 4 factors at the top of the image broadly describe resilience, a passive concept, our ability to respond when something goes wrong. The factors in the bottom half of the image are really describing the factors that bring positivity into the picture. So when something goes wrong, we can respond because we have to, or we can respond because we want to. And the factors at the bottom that explain challenge and confidence are relevant here. So the first is risk orientation, and that's really about the extent to which I'm prepared to try new things, adjust to new situations, deal with new people, look at new events, because I see in them opportunities when other people might see a risk. But that's coupled with learning orientation. And one thing that Peter and I are in complete agreement about is this is our favorite of the 4 C's, because this is, I would say, almost at the heart of the mental toughness concept, especially learning orientation. Because you can do things, you can take chances, you can explore new things. And if you don't extract the learning from those, whether the experience was good or bad, you make very little progress in life. So learning orientation is about your mindset in terms of reflection. Do you reflect and extract learning from what happens to you as you go through life? And then finally, there's confidence, and that rests on 2 factors. One is confidence in abilities, and that's particularly interesting because it's really about self-belief. And some of us have abilities, and we have some remarkable abilities, but we doubt our own abilities. So we doubt them, we don't have belief in our own abilities, we don't use them. Sadly, you can actually have people with moderate amounts of ability who think they've got a lot, and as yet we haven't found a cure for that. It can be a challenge when you come across it. And then finally, interpersonal confidence, and that's the extent to which you are prepared to influence others to the extent that they might influence you. So it's really about being able to engage with the world around you, and if you have abilities, to be able to present those to other people so that they become available to other people. One of the most important manifestations of interpersonal confidence, though, is the preparedness to ask questions. People with low levels of interpersonal confidence will often not ask questions when they need to in order to gain understanding. And when you ask them why, the answer is generally, I didn't want to look stupid. But people with high levels of interpersonal confidence aren't worried about that. Looking stupid is not a factor. They want to know, they want to understand, they want to learn. So that's a very quick run through the mental toughness concept. We have the 4 C's, and importantly, we now have the 8 factors. The thing to understand is that the 8 factors are all independent. In other words, you can have high and low scores in almost any permutation, and we know there are 40,000 permutations of scores. So we are able to achieve one of the goals of psychology. We're able to understand individual differences to a much greater level than perhaps has been achieved previously. So I think hopefully the people have understood this. We've now got a psychometric measure which enables people to assess where they stand on these factors and on the constructs. So we're able to diagnose, we're, we're able to diagnose, we're able to direct interventions better. And if we can measure, we can re-measure to see where we've made a difference and what difference that our change in our mental toughness has made to things like performance, well-being, and so on. So at this point, I'll hand back to Susie, because I think we're going to be ready to deal with some questions.
Really, Doug, sorry. There's just a couple of slides that you might want to speak to. So there's the snapshot of the report there that might be helpful to talk to as well.
Okay, this is a particularly useful report because it really talks about, talks to a number of issues. Well, firstly, there's quite a lot of use of typing instruments in organizational development and individual development. They are to some extent useful, but they're not terribly useful. If you look at, this is a typical output from the completion of the MTEQ+, which is the most sophisticated version of the mental toughness questionnaire. If you were to look at the top line and look at the score for overall mental toughness, the scores appear on a traditional STEN scale. You'd see that this individual scores at STEN 7. That's statistically definitely above average. The average score on the planet is around 5.5. So this person is clearly more mentally tough than average. So would you describe this person as mentally tough, or would you describe them as mentally sensitive? And this is where drawing attention to the factors is important, because you can see the factors underneath. They're the scales that are highlighted in yellow. And we can see, yes, this person has got a very high score on life control. So it's got a very strong sense of can-do. It's very goal-orientated, very achievement-orientated, very risk-orientated, high confidence and abilities, and is interpersonally confident. And you can understand why this person might be seen as a high-achieving individual. Now, this person came to our attention about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And he had, and his team had been extremely successful for some time, for many months and years, in fact. He's a senior leader in a major international organization. And suddenly COVID-19 happens, the team was dispersed, they all started working from home, and he began to struggle. And one of the activities was, well, let's look at your mental toughness profile. And what we can see here is that, yes, he's got some high scores. He's got mental toughness across some of the key factors, but there's a couple of areas where he's got a degree of mental sensitivity. So his emotional control score is quite low. It means he isn't managing his emotional responses to events. His learning orientation score is also quite low, which means that as events occur, and often it's setbacks and things go wrong, he isn't really learning from what's going on and is not being able to sort of make progress and put things right. So when we, well, as the coach, worked with him, bit by bit, we began to unpick this. And one of the factors was he'd built up a very good team, and the team had been in place for some time. His emotional control was always low, but it was never an issue before COVID-19, because if he lost it or got angry or got annoyed or even got excessively joyful, the team dealt with it. They would pull his leg, they would bring him around, and the team were in effect acting as coaches or mentors for him, even though they were reporting to him. So they knew how to deal with it, and it wasn't it didn't become an issue, and he would calm down and carry on. He's now working at home alone. Nobody's doing that for him. So this particular issue is becoming a bigger issue as the situation has changed. So at one time, he's very, very successful and his emotional control is not an issue. Now, in a different situation, it is an issue. And similarly with positive learning orientation, what we found was that this individual, when things occurred, it was the team that would get together and say, well, what happens? Can we put it right? Can we do it better? And they would bring their solutions to him. He wasn't really the instigator of the improvement elements in their work. But again, sat at home on his own, he didn't have that support of the team around him. And suddenly, as things went wrong, he found he wasn't, as an individual, sat on his own, he wasn't really able to deal with things that had gone wrong. So this is an example of, firstly, am I mentally tough or am I mentally sensitive? Well, nobody is, well, very, very, very few people are truly mentally tough across every single one of those scales. And very, very few are truly mentally sensitive across all of these scales. We're actually much more complex than that. We're a mixture. And I think that I'm going to be preaching to the converted. If you're a coach, you know this very, very well. If you're a developer of individuals, you know this very, very well. It's a question of understanding where those differences lie for the individual that I'm particularly trying to help. Because we could probably test 40,000 people and you will see 40,000 different profiles. The issues will be different for each and every one of us. And Peter and I are actually working with a musician, I'm going to generalize it, who has got a whole series of mentally sensitive scores, but interpersonal confidence is almost off the scale. So we can come across almost any pattern that you want to see, and it'll help to explain what's happening for the individual. It'll explain their behavior, it'll explain their well-being, it'll explain their response to events.
Thanks, Doug. I think that's a great example, and I've personally seen similar examples like that really help you to, I guess, look at it in a much more nuanced way, which is what you said. So we do have a number of questions that we want to get through tonight if we can, but if anyone has a burning question, you might like to enter it in the chat box, and it might align to the themes of some of the questions that have already come through. But I'm going to make a start now, if that's all right. Now, there is one more slide, Doug, and I'm wondering whether it's quite relevant to the first question that someone's asked for tonight or not. So
it could well be, but I know the question, and I think the person to deal with this question is Peter.
It's Peter. So the question was Paddy Upton, who I'd never heard of, but apparently is, I'm not a big sports person, Peter is, quite a well-known coach, sports coach, compares mental toughness with the traits of a psychopath. What are your thoughts on this comparison?
Right, thanks very much. And yeah, that I had to look him up. Not my knowledge of Australian sport is obviously more limited than I thought. But yeah, clearly a man who knows his business. However, yeah, I think we have to be really cautious when we start throwing terms like psychopathic around, because they have particular meanings in a psychological sense. What we find is, for perhaps for too long, sport has informed everywhere else, but I think everywhere else can also inform sport. I work with a lot of professional elite sports people, and the key word is they're people. They're as complex and as troubled and as positive as the rest of us. There is no magic bullet. They're not necessarily all 10 on mental toughness. But when looking specifically at the question, because it has concerned me in the past, if we produce mentally tough people, are these people going to be psychopathic, dominating the world, being inappropriate? And what we find is that mentally tough people, and the slide illustrates it, it's a network analysis from Costas at Queen's University in Belfast, is actually mental toughness doesn't relate at all to psychopathy. There's the dark triad, which is Machiavellianism's is an element, psychopathy it is another element, and narcissism is the third element. It does relate to narcissism, which we'd expect, because narcissism is thinking you're really good, really positive, but moderates the impact of that. But there's no link to psychopathy. So I think I work with sports people. They're not mean people. They're certainly focused, but the thing that really worries them compared to everything on the field is their family, their friends, their children. So that wouldn't be psychopathic behavior. So mentally tough people are emotionally literate. they're rounded individuals, as are sensitive people. But, you know, I would think it's, well, we can show empirically in peer-reviewed journals it isn't related to psychopathy.
So the science supports that. I guess the concern is that those abilities, if you like, or capabilities could be used for good or evil.
Yeah, absolutely. But a mentally tough person, by definition, doesn't have to score points off people to feel good about themselves. So they're more likely to be caring. They're more likely to be supportive of other people because they don't need people to give them external validation. So it again, it's more nuanced, it's more subtle. But yeah, elite sports people aren't any more psychopathic than anybody else. So yeah, the research doesn't match the comment.
Yeah, fantastic response. The next question is advice for having a conversation with someone who is in victim mode, I guess from, you know, low on life control, and does not believe they can build their mental toughness.
Yeah, I'm becoming dual team on this app. I tend to ramble on, so Doug stops me quite rightly. On this case, when we're talking about, you know, we have toughness. The opposite end of our scale is sensitivity. We don't buy in any way the idea of weakness. Sensitive people have a different orientation. It's a more complex road to travel, but it's a more interesting road to many extent. But if people want to build a mental toughness or need to build it, to answer the question here specifically, you need fairy steps. You need some small wins. You need to be able to show that that you could actually change some elements. If it was really easy, people would do it. Yeah, people aren't foolish. If it was, and it's like getting physically fit. You know, thinking physically fit ain't going to do it. Having a walk occasion ain't going to do it. You have to commit to it. So how do you get people out of, you know, to use the question from the phrase from the question, is show people there's an incremental learning. Don't go for the big fix, the big change, the positive, you know, we can sort this out. Show them that it works by research, by personal experience, by coaching experience, by their own experience. So all those things come together, pick something, improve it, change it, then move forward.
And I think that, I mean, obviously the research around neuroplasticity, you know, where I guess we can now say that you can teach old dogs new tricks, but no one ever said it was going to be easy or it was going to happen overnight. And I know in the workshops that we run, we usually introduce that, although many people have become more aware of that now, that it is possible to change. And I think, you know, for me, speaking personally as a clinician and coach over the years, I wouldn't be doing the work that I was doing if I didn't believe that people are capable of change as well. So, but again, not always easy and not always quick.
No,
Peter's right though, because, oh, sorry. Go on, Peter. The idea of incremental change is key, but it's also going to be measurable. Because one thing that we find is, if you look at things like positive thinking tools and techniques, what's coming through is that they work, but they work better for people who already think positively. So they kind of get it and get that it's going to work. For people who are more mentally sensitive, they need to believe that somehow that it's going to work. And a lot of tools and techniques are really bringing in very gradual change. So we often talk about changing a behavior or an aspect of mindset can take 40 to 90 days. Well, those changes day by day are tiny. And if you can't detect them and you can't measure them, then a more mentally sensitive individual is more likely to give up because it's not working. A mentally tough person is more likely to persevere. And so that's why we're beginning to see the incorporation of measurement, whether that's using bio instruments that measure things like how calm you are, or Fitbit, you know, heart rate monitors. But we're also bringing into play other exercises that are beginning to measure tiny changes, so that somebody can say, okay, today I did 0.5% better than yesterday. Oh, look, I did 1% better than 2 days ago. If there isn't that sense of progress, they will give up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's why the biofeedback can be really helpful when you're teaching the anxiety management skills, because I spent many years teaching people abdominal breathing skills to overcome anxiety, and they sort of go, they think, yeah, does this really work or not? It doesn't feel like it works. But when you actually use some form of biofeedback and you can see the impact, and yeah, you can use a Fitbit to be able to, I've heard clients or people in workshops say that they actually use the Fitbit to bring their heart rate down and then make a really challenging phone call or whatever. But you need that feedback, don't you, to see that you are making the skills that you're using are working, and that they're making some small changes over time.
Yeah, and we put into practice what we say, because I am wearing my Fitbit now, monitoring my heart rate on a webinar, because I find them stressful. It's 20 beats per minute above my normal, and compared to normal teaching when you can actually see people and interact with them, it shoots up. So yes, we do monitor, and somebody like me, biofeedback is a really powerful tool for helping me control my stress levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too, Peter. So the next question is, this is probably one that a lot of people would be interested in. What's the best thing a leader can do to support someone in their team who is mentally sensitive during the current situation?
So Doug can start on this one. His expertise in leadership is greater than mine. Do you want a shot at Doug?
Well, that's a great question, actually, Susie, because I think in the last webinar, we touched upon this, because our experience over the COVID-19 crisis is, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, our world came to a shuddering halt. It seemed to be all about toilet rolls and baked beans. Then suddenly...
We had pasta over here.
Sorry?
We had pasta over here, not baked beans.
Oh, right, okay. Well, we were beginning to speculate whether there was a link between baked beans and toilet rolls, but that's for another. So when we suddenly came to a point when we started to get in lots and lots of inquiries, and that has turned into a flood. We now get lots of interest. We're running lots of webinars, and there are 3 themes. And the first theme is it's linked to that profile that I showed earlier. We're getting an awful lot of people in leadership positions who are saying, hang on, I've been fine for a long, long time. Suddenly I'm struggling. Why am I struggling? So the first thing is, leader, was quoting for the Bible perhaps, leader, heal thyself. You can't sort anybody else out if you're suddenly having a problem. And you've got to be honest about it, because a lot of people in leadership roles are finding this a big struggle. And it's kind of obvious, you know, if your job is to set goals, it's very difficult to do that right now. If it's your job to feel and transmit a huge degree or a significant degree of control, it's actually very difficult to feel in control of what's going on. Things are controlling you, and you've got to, you know, your locus of control is very much reduced. So there are big challenges for people who are in leadership roles. But the second area of interest is people are beginning to say, people in leadership roles are saying, I'm now no longer in contact with my staff. They've all gone home, or they're working on the front line and I can't see them as often as I did before. I don't know what state they're in, but what I do detect is a growth in mental health issues, and we're seeing that everywhere. I mean, recorded mental health problems are going through the roof in the UK at the moment. And the third area, which I think is very encouraging and perhaps points to what good leaders should be doing, is, yes, it will be over one day. We will return to some kind of normality, and we will be in a position where we can prosper. This is the optimistic me coming through. But people are beginning to say, when we get back together, I need to reassemble my team, reassemble my workforce, reassemble my staff, and we've got a lot of ground to catch up on, lost ground. And I need everybody 100% because we need to get going. But I don't think all my staff are 100%, and they're going to be right. There are going to be some people who are ready for it, and Peter and I think there's going to be a lot of people who are not ready for it. They will have been beaten down by their experiences. So that's kind of a part answer to the question. I mean, the first thing is just check yourself, understand yourself. because you're central, you're to the well-being and the performance of all the people around you.
Yep.
Then understand them, understand what's going on with them, because you can't put anything right if you don't know what the problem is. Peter?
Peter, you're going to add to that?
No, I think it is the starting point again, that it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the measurement. It's, you know, my first ever research paper many years ago was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think sometimes a generic approach doesn't work. I think people know the teams, they know their leadership style, they know themselves, and it's building on that. And it's not going for a simple off-the-shelf solution. You know, does everybody need relaxation training? Perhaps not. It's targeted, and I know that the people listening in, and the coaching profession, that's what you do as a living. It's an individualized approach based on a theoretical concept is my starting point.
Yeah, and I think for me, what I've seen, and I think you can quote, there's research to support this too, is that the mental toughness scores tend to be higher the higher you go up in the organisation in terms of the leadership. But what we see often are leaders having insights that they are quite high on, a number of the subscales of mental toughness, but they don't have much compassion for people in their team that aren't. And I guess as that example you gave before, Doug, where they might actually be really surprised when they've had a high performer, there's been no issues, and then there's a change of context, and then this person, what on earth is happening for this person? So, I mean, there's a great movement, as you know, and wonderful research going on about compassion-based approaches in the workplace at the moment. And I think there's a real opportunity for leaders to also develop greater levels of compassion when people aren't, as tough as they are, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think they might have compassion, but they don't recognise what they don't recognise. They don't even recognise it as an issue. It's not that they're not caring. They just don't see why that would be an issue.
Exactly. And I think, again, that's why, we, like you, have been doing this work for quite a while. And I guess I'm really curious about the companies we've worked with, and we've taught this proactively, how well they're doing now compared to people that haven't had this as a model to look at. How are people going in the team? Because it does build a language, where it's a shared language then, and a shared understanding, and we can talk about it and ask for help as well if we need, I think. So I think the model itself could be really helpful to introduce into a team.
Yeah,
but you've also brought in some. Oh, sorry, go on.
Doug, you.
No, you've also brought in something useful there, Susie, in that being mentally tough, whether it's on all of the factors or some of the factors, does confer an advantage. We know that there's an advantage, but there are potential disadvantages if you're not self-aware. So if you've got too high a level of control, you think you can control everything. You can try to achieve too much. And sometimes you can end up micromanaging because you can, and you don't have the confidence in people around you. Too high a level of commitment, you will again try to set too many goals. Too high a level of challenge, you take too many risks. And if you have too high level of confidence, well, that can intimidate people around you. Now, if you're not self-aware about that, all you're doing is buying into, well, I can do things, without fully understanding that your impact on the people that depend on you, and you also often depend on them, can be actually counterproductive. The saving grace, though, I think, hopefully Peter will agree, is that the mentally tough tend to be more solution focused than problem focused. And you would hope that introducing self-awareness to the more mentally tough, and that's people in leadership roles, shouldn't be as big a challenge. Go on, Peter.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. No, I agree.
Okay, we're not even halfway through the questions yet. We've got about 20 minutes to go, but I'll pick up some that I think there'll be a lot of interest in. So someone said, what do you think is the single most valuable quality for mental toughness? This is favourites, is it?
Yeah, well, it's your favourites. I mean, look at challenge, but I think from me, in the current situation, is mentally tough people are more reality-based and sort of fact-check. So because we live in a swirl of rumours and concerns and misunderstanding probability, So a mentally tough person doesn't bemoan the fact we are where we are. They deal with where we are. Yeah, we wouldn't choose to be here, but we're here. So it's that understanding of reality, which I think is the core.
Yeah. And do you think that fits under emotional control, or perhaps
I think it's a cluster of all of them.
Yeah.
Coming together. That as Doug said, mentally tough people, when we look, tend to be more analytic and intuitive. Now, the intuitive skill set is really important, and we need to develop that and work with people like that. But under really stressful situations, some of the intuition can lead people astray. I mean, all you've got to look on social media and some of the conspiracy theories, and you do despair sometimes. But I can understand the processes. So, we're staying fact-based, saying analytical when we're in a situation is one of the key strengths. Of course, it might get rid of creativity and other solutions, so that's why we need a balance, and we need to work with a diverse team. So everybody's got some strengths, but that analytical thing is key to me. But it would, because I'm analytical. So, talk about cheering on your own fans. That's how it works. So I work with people who have a completely different orientation, because what I see as good, they don't. And working with colleagues who disagree with you is super.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug?
Well, I agree with Peter. I think the one observation that I've got is that of the people who are coming to us either through our partners or coming directly, I would say the control construct is the one that is revealing most problems. It's this sense of I've got a moderate level of live control. Suddenly I find I don't have sufficient control of what's going on. It's kind of the ground has gone away from under my feet. But I agree with Peter, all 4 constructs, all 8 factors are important.
Absolutely, I agree with you too, but I just want to pick up that challenge is my favorite subscale as well, because for me it really differentiates resilience in terms of, and I mentioned this on the last call, that resilience is generally when the curveballs hit or adversity happens, and it's how we react or respond ideally to it. But people that are high on challenge don't wait for the curveballs. They proactively seek out growth opportunities for that intent purpose of growth and development. And as a coach, that's what we try to do in terms of people's personal growth and development. And I'd much prefer to see that. Although I had a conversation with someone today about this. I mean, it is those, the suffering, sometimes these awful circumstances that people go through that do, I guess, help us develop some of these qualities. But yeah, anyway, that's my take on it. So this is a question that I know people will ask, and even if we cover it, they'll still want to know more, which is, how do you cultivate mental toughness?
I borrow one of Doug's lines, but there's a lot of techniques. Every technique works, but every technique doesn't work for every person. So how do you cultivate mental toughness? You identify where the gap is. There's nothing like annoying people by enhancing something that doesn't need enhancing. I mean, they tend to listen to somebody whose expertise is their coach because they're polite, but you're losing the flow, really. So it's identifying what the challenges are from their perspective, and then there's a range of techniques. So somebody like me, for example, I'm married to a physio who does yoga and the happy places. Doesn't work for me at all. I don't have a happy place. I suspect that I can do biofeedback, which is really productive. So it's finding out what works for you and being flexible. And we're always open to different ideas. So somebody like me, if I'm trying to help improve people's attention, their focus, their commitment, learning to play a musical instrument is a really funky one. There's lots of ways. Most of the tried and tested methods work, but not for everybody. Teaching somebody SMART goals who's high on commitment isn't an effective use. They'll like it and they'll talk about it and they'll do it, but that's not what they needed. So it's targeted interventions, being flexible and just not being awkward as academics can be. There's loads of good stuff across different disciplines and different domains and different practitioners. So I'm just like a magpie. I'll just borrow it. I'll credit it where it comes from, but I'm not stuck in a rut If somebody comes up with a really fascinating idea, I'll give it a go.
Absolutely. But what I guess, and I spoke to this last time too, Peter, when we met and you presented it as a sports psychologist and you went through all the interventions, and I'm sitting there as a clinical psych and I'm thinking, I use those same interventions. So,
Yeah.
and I usually say, unless you've been, you know, fortunate, tongue in cheek, to see a clinical psych, you would learn these techniques to overcome anxiety disorders or depression, or if you've seen a great sports psychologist or coach and their views, we use similar techniques, but just in different.
We just call them different names, and of course, when we're bringing up our kids, we use the same techniques and call them different names again. You know, just parenting or being humane or a good egg or a whole range. But the more we learn and the less parochial we get, the more powerful are these interventions. So if it works, it works.
Absolutely. Doug, any comment?
Yeah, is it possible to put the matrix analysis image back up?
Yes, I can do that.
Because this is relevant to this discussion.
2 seconds. Here we go. Backwards one. Yeah.
Right. This is quite a remarkable piece of research that's been carried out by our colleague, Dr. Kostas Papageorgiou at Queen's University, Belfast. And he's particularly interested in a number of things, but one of the interesting consequences of this is describing the connection between core constructs in some key models. So there's the big five, which is describing behavior, the mental toughness concept, the dark triad, and stress. This is the matrix. I think Kostas got 800 people to complete questionnaires for all four of those elements. This is the average network for this group of 800. But one thing he did notice was that when he looked at individuals, the individual network was quite unique to each individual. So the links between factors, between constructs, would be different for an individual. So here we can see the link between commitment and conscientiousness is quite a thick green connection. In another individual, it might be a lot slimmer, which tells us that each of us have got a different set of interplay between the constructs, particularly between mental toughness and behavior. Now, what Kostas has begun to understand and is beginning to explore is this is potentially explaining why some interventions work for some people and don't work for others. Because if your series of connections is unique to you, and you, for instance, decide to do something about improving commitment, and there's a very poor link with openness to experience, you might not change that behavior at all. However, it's also explaining why sometimes we get unintended consequences. So if you look towards the bottom of the image on the left-hand side, imagine that we're directing interventions towards confidence, which is conf in the red circle. What we can see here, if this was an individual, it's likely that we would have an impact on their extroversion, but we'd also have an impact on their narcissism. But that's maybe not what we were seeking to achieve. Maybe we're just trying to build their confidence. So understanding the individual network for people, I think we're at the early stages of beginning to understand why some interventions work for some people and not for others. And we're beginning to understand why sometimes we get unintended consequences from some of the interventions. But as Peter said, you have to start with a clearly identified need, because you can't direct any intervention until you understand that. But we're beginning through this kind of work to be able to understand that a lot better. And again, it's illustrating there's a degree of complexity. You can't sit there and say, I need to boost somebody's confidence, because we can see here, confidence is connected in different ways to a number of other constructs. We have to understand a slightly bigger picture.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we're learning more and I guess again more nuanced as the research progresses. I'm going to move on. We've got 10 minutes to go. There's a couple of key questions, I think, here. Someone has sent in a question asking, does mental toughness have a strong correlation with harmonious passion? And this one sort of stood out for me because I'm a big fan of Robert Vallerand's work on passion that differentiates obsessive passion versus harmonious passion, and harmonious passion being highly correlated with well-being and obsessive passion being shown to detract from well-being. I've got my own thoughts about this, but I think you also have some thoughts, Peter, on that one.
I do. Yeah, it got me thinking back to my undergraduate days because, yeah, a long time ago, but yeah, Vallerand's work was based on DC and Ryan, who was based on Oldham, who was based on Hertzberg, was based on Maslow. So it's basically need theory. And yeah, it's got some interesting stuff to say. But if you look at passion, which you was trying to do, and it's that positive passion versus more negative passion. I did my PhD in why people run marathons. 7 years later, I found out they run marathons because they like running marathons. You know, 7 years I'm not going to get back easily. But the bottom line there is people do stuff they like doing, and looking at passion. You know, if you're doing it as part of a balanced portfolio and you enjoy the activity, that's good. If you do it because you have to do it, that can be bad, and that's where it ties into commitment and sticking to stuff. So it's not always bad. So I've done quite a lot of research on diet, for example, and people, if they're obsessive about the diet, that can be problematic. But doing stuff you don't like is what commitment is. So it is that joy of, yeah, it's that passion of doing an activity. And yeah, there's a couple of research papers from Lincoln which show that higher mental toughness people are experiencing more flow when they're doing their activities, so that they do experience it in a positive way. What we learned from sports psychology, which tried in the 80s to say that addiction could be split into negative addiction and positive addiction, it wasn't particularly psychologically healthy, and Vallerand's work came into that the idea that all addiction's not good. If you have to do something, it's not good from a psychology point of view. If you want to do something and enjoy it and it gives you great pleasure, absolutely. But if you miss it, and the fact you're missing it drives the process, that's the more obsessive and compulsive approach. So it ties into flow, it ties into a positive experience, it ties into growth. So yeah, bottom line from my point of view, do stuff you enjoy, and sometimes you have to do stuff you don't enjoy, and that's the hard yards. You know, for me, detail, writing research papers is never easy, but I have to stick my head down and grind it out. But when I have a choice, do stuff I don't have to grind out.
Yes. So Peter, this is a question that comes up a lot in the licensed user training when people say, but you know, I'm low on commitment, but I'm not like that in all contexts. And I guess, I mean, your explanation around that, I've got my own, but I'd love to hear your explanation so people are really clear on that.
Yeah, well, if you're lower on commitment, doing something you like doing isn't commitment. You know, we can all do stuff, you know. Would I prefer, I've got a lot of analysis to do this afternoon, I prefer to go play my guitar. That's not, yeah. So I might show low commitment. What would be high commitment is me doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Fantastic.
But yeah, doing stuff you enjoy,
yeah,
is great. However, what we want people to do to grow and develop is move slightly outside the comfort zone and do other things, and that's harder, and that's where commitment comes into it. So sticking to something which you enjoy doing, that's what I found after my PhD after 7 years. It's fairly circular. You know, it's not rocket science to discover why do people run marathons. It's because they enjoy running. You think, oops, yeah, I overcomplicated psychological theory. So I think that's where the mismatch, if there is a mismatch, comes. Commitment comes into play, is doing stuff we don't particularly want to do.
Yeah, I like that. And Doug, any comments? I've got one last question tonight that I'd love to get to. But
well, no, I think Peter has answered that question fully. Let's get on with another question.
I think this one does come up, and we usually speak to this quite proactively if we're working with organisations, and I've actually been on a panel with another one of my colleagues, an academic, and had a bit of a debate around this, around what is the role you know, and I've seen people tweet like, we don't need resilience training, we need the system to change. And so I absolutely believe that we can and we should be teaching these skills, particularly because I've sat with hundreds of people and I've seen the impact that can have on people's lives. But, you know, I'm also aware that there are systems, organisations, systems, structures, policies, procedures that actively undermine resilience and well-being. So there is a role of the system. And so this question is, how do we get the balance? How do we get the right balance between developing individual mental toughness and acknowledging the need for systemic support? I'd love to hear both of you on that one.
If I have the first shot, absolutely there has to be a balance, and that's well illustrated, I think, in our work we do in schools. So we have sensitive pupils who perform less well generally. In that situation, the individualised work and working with people to develop the toughness comes into play, because we're dealing with a situation as it is, not as we want it to. At the same time, it'd be better if schools were better able to deal with sensitive pupils. We don't. So it's changing people to operate in the world as it is. But some of the criticism for psychologists, because psychologists is the study of small groups and individuals. I'm not a sociologist, but you know, my sister is. Fully respect the area. Is, do you change the context you operate? And it needs a bit of both. So how could sensitive people do better at school? We could make them less sensitive, and that's an approach. Or the school could put in systems and approaches which allow the sensitive people to prosper. And that's simple. If you think back to your school days, I hated mine. If you're a sensitive individual and you're upset, you just move from class to class. There's nowhere to go. Yeah, if you get upset, there's no quiet space. There's no breakout situations if you can. And it's so when we're working with schools, we put both into place. Yeah, just as a broad example, that we can help people if they want to change, but the responsibility, you know, in UK law, if you look at stress, is fitting the job to the person, if you can, firstly, not the person to the job. The two come in. So if you can fit the job to the person and make it a more comfortable place for sensitive people, great. Sometimes you can't, like the armed forces or the police. So then you are focusing on the individual. So the balance depends on the context, but we don't just want to change people to fit into society it is. We want to change society to fit into the people just as much. And the COVID crisis might give us an opportunity to change all that.
Yeah, I love that. That's a wonderful response. Thank you. And Doug?
Well, Peter's made reference to something. It reminds me that when we first launched the 4Cs concept, that was 2002, 2003. In the UK, there was a lot of interest in understanding stress. And the Health and Safety Executive, which is part of the government, published something called the Draft Management Standards. And these were 5 standards that all organisations should adopt. But one thing we noticed about those standards is they were all about what the organisation should do. And we thought this was very one-sided, because what we know is you could, in some situations, create a very healthy and safe environment, but some people would still struggle, even in that almost perfectly protected environment. And so it was completely missing the other side of the picture, that we respond to situations and to events, and we can actually respond negatively to a perfectly safe environment. We can still worry about it, and we see that all the time. So as Peter suggests, it is a matter of balance. Employers and government have got an obligation to create the safest environment, but we've also got to do something about the individual and the individual's response. So.
Absolutely, I love that. Now I know we're right on time, and there were some questions specifically relating to schools. I know we have a number of people on from schools. I'm thinking we might have another webinar at some point specifically relating to education, because we are seeing a growing interest here in Australia, and I know you've done quite a lot of work in the UK that we would love to hear more about into the future as well. So thank you so much to Peter and Doug for joining us tonight and sharing your expert knowledge and experience in this field. Just very quickly, we do offer the licensed user training, and we've got a special offer with resilience coaching right now. It's significantly discounted. It's master's level coaches that work with us, so can think about that. We also have a curriculum that I created with Daniela Falecki, who is an educator as well, pitched at year 9, year 10. So, but thank you again. I'm so thankful for people to come on tonight and to be wanting to learn a bit more about this construct that we absolutely think is a great one to use right now, but also in terms of people's future growth and development as well. So thank you. Any last words or comments, Doug or Peter?
No, thank you all. And I kept my heart rate below 100, which is a sure sign it's well organised and a pleasure to be here.
Well done.
Yeah. And thank you, Susie, and thank you especially Claudia, who's kind of the hidden person behind all of this and has organised it.
Yes.
We've really enjoyed it. We think they're fantastic questions. And I'm sure, well, I'm happy to come back, and I'm sure Peter would be happy to come back. And maybe we should just focus a bit more on the questions.
Yes, and look, apologies to the questions that we didn't get to, but if it's really burning, we will, because I haven't got the names of the people that sent them in, but please email us and we will come back with a response if we can. So thank you and good evening, everyone.
And good morning from us.
Oh yeah, good morning. Good morning.